All right, on our continuing beginner coral series, we have reached number 5. A lot of you guys have probably been waiting for us to do this one. We're going to do another combination because they're very similar. We're going to do the Zoanthids and the Palys. They come in a very wide variety of colors, pretty much any color you can think of. They also come in a very wide price range, from probably 1 cent per polyp up to $1,500 per polyp. So they are a beginner coral. They're also a collector, very advanced coral. One little word of advice with zoas that I've learned over the years is the cooler it looks, the harder it is to keep, and the slower it grows. Here is Eli for some more information on number 5.
Thank you for the intro, Ernie. And as he just described, we are now on number 5 of our beginner corals list, and we're talking about Zoanthids and Palythoas. As he mentioned, they do happen to be one of the easiest corals out there. A lot of people, this is one of the first corals that they go home with when they just set up a tank. They're not very picky, generally. A lot of the varieties of Zoanthids out there will thrive with varying levels of alkalinity, calcium. They're really not that picky in regards to those elements. Same with nitrates and phosphates. If you have a tank that runs kind of high in the nutrient department, Zoanthids generally still are not very picky about that. Zoanthids come in a wide variety of colors, from your very dull and drab greens and browns all the way to your pinks and golds and yellows and blues that are a little more sought after. As Ernie mentioned, this does change the prices quite a bit, with some of your more common color varieties being worth a lot less than some of the cool designer varieties. There are probably about 1,000 names under the sun for different varieties of Zoanthids. And it's very easy to get kind of caught up in the name game with the zoas, but for the sake of keeping them, they're all just as cool. A lot of these different color morphs do have these trade names though that make tracking lineage a little bit difficult for the beginner hobbyist, but nonetheless they're a very good beginner coral. Just to quickly go over the difference between what you would typically consider a Zoanthid and what you would consider a Pally, the easiest difference is just going to be the size of the polyps. Typically, Zoanthids are like a 1/4 inch heads or less, whereas the Palythoas are going to be about a 1/2 inch around per polyp, sometimes a little bit more even. Sometimes upwards of, honestly, 1.5 inches, almost 2 inches with some of the larger species of Palythoas. One of the biggest things to keep in mind with the Zoanthids and Palys is a toxin known as palytoxin, which really is a concern when you come into fragging the Zoanthid corals. Anytime you are cutting these corals, or if you say take a plug out of a tank to brush some algae off of it, you want to be very careful. Generally, you want to wear your eyeglasses, wear gloves if applicable, because these corals do tend to carry a very potent neurotoxin that can be very discomforting if you do come across it. So if you have open cuts on your hand, definitely not a good time to go about cutting these corals or just handling them. But generally, this is not an issue that you really run across. Still something that you want to treat very sincerely. As Ernie mentioned earlier, and it was greatly spoken, it does seem that the nicest zoas, nicest pallies tend to be the fastest ones to melt in your aquarium, which is just kind of disheartening because a lot of times these come with a very high price tag. A lot of times some of these nicer Zoanthids are going for $20, $50, $100, some of them even $1,000 per head. And when you get to these higher price ranges, generally that price is because this lineage is a type that is very prone to melting, very prone to not growing well in a lot of conditions. But generally, the ones that you're going to see in our shop and the ones that you're going to see in your average shop for a much lower price tags are going to be very easy and very hardy corals. Sometimes these corals do tend to err on the side of invasive. Generally, the Palythoas tend to grow very quickly, and especially Zoanthids or Palys that are close to brown or green in color tend to grow very quickly. So for this reason, if you do plan on keeping those types, it's definitely a good idea to kind of keep them on their own spot on the rockwork, just for ease of maintenance down the road if it does come time to removing them from the tank. As always, thank you guys for tuning in to number 5 on our beginner coral list. Let us know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions for future videos. Check us out in any 3 of our locations or osachoice.com for your aquarium keeping needs, and keep on reefing.